What happens when 6 innocent young women discover enough gold to buy a small country? What happens when they realize their own government wants to steal it from them? And what happens when they decide to fight back with the most ruthless mercenaries money can buy? By the end of this story, you'll understand how the Goldfield War of 1889 almost split the United States in half, and why 6 sisters became the most wanted criminals in American history. But first, you need to know how a family picnic turned into the discovery that would change everything. The Nevada Territory in 1889 was a land where fortunes appeared overnight and disappeared just as quickly, where the difference between wealth and poverty could be measured in inches of earth, and where the federal government's hunger for gold was matched only by its willingness to kill for it. It was here, in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountains, that the Ashford sisters would learn that sometimes the greatest treasure becomes the greatest curse. But here's the question that'll blow your mind. What would you do if you found enough gold to make you richer than the Rockefellers, but claiming it meant going to war with the United States government? Would you walk away, or would you fight? The Ashford sisters chose war, and what happened next will shock you to your core. Cornelius Ashford was the kind of banker who counted every penny twice and trusted no one completely. He'd built his fortune through careful investments and cautious loans, establishing the Ashford Banking House as one of the most respected financial institutions west of the Mississippi. His wife Eleanor had given him 6 daughters before dying in childbirth with their youngest, and Cornelius had raised those girls with the same meticulous attention he gave his ledger books. The eldest was Victoria, 26, with a mind for numbers that rivaled her father's, and a beauty that could stop traffic on the busiest street in San Francisco. Then came Alexandra, 24, whose charm could convince a snake to give up its venom and whose business instincts were sharper than a cavalry saber. Beatrice, 22, was the strategist of the family, able to see 10 moves ahead in any game of chess or commerce. Cordelia, 20, possessed a gift for languages and could speak fluent Spanish, French, German, and 3 different Native American dialects. The twins Evangeline and Serafina were 19 and identical in appearance, but opposite in temperament. Evangeline was the diplomat, able to negotiate peace between warring factions with nothing but words and a smile. Serafina was the warrior, quick with both wit and weapon, equally comfortable in a ballroom or a battlefield. Now here's where it gets interesting, and I mean really interesting, because what these 6 women discovered on a simple family outing would make the California gold rush look like pocket change. Are you ready for this? It was supposed to be a peaceful Sunday picnic in the hills outside Carson City. Cornelius had been working too hard, his daughters had been managing the bank's day-to-day operations, and Eleanor's sister Martha had suggested they all needed fresh air and family time. So they packed a lunch, hitched up the wagon, and headed into the mountains for what they thought would be a quiet afternoon. The spot they chose was a meadow beside a crystal-clear stream, surrounded by pine trees and granite outcroppings. While Cornelius dozed in the shade and the older sisters unpacked the food, the twins decided to explore the stream, looking for pretty stones to add to their collection. But what they found wasn't pretty stones. What they found was something that would change the course of American history. "Sarah, look at this," Evangeline called, holding up a rock that glittered in the afternoon sunlight. "Is this?" Serafina took the stone, her heart pounding as she recognized the telltale gleam of gold. But this wasn't just a nugget. This was a chunk of pure ore the size of a man's fist, worth more than most people made in a lifetime. "Don't say anything," Serafina whispered, glancing back at their family. "Not yet. Let's see how much more there is." What they discovered next will make your jaw drop. Because this wasn't just a gold deposit. This was the mother lode, the kind of strike that legends are made of. Working quietly while their family enjoyed the picnic, the twins followed the stream upstream, finding gold nuggets scattered along the banks like pebbles. But the real treasure was in the granite cliff face where the stream originated, a vein of pure gold ore running through the rock like a golden highway, easily 20 feet wide and extending deeper into the mountain than they could see. "My God," Evangeline breathed, There must be millions of dollars worth here, maybe tens of millions. Maybe hundreds of millions, Serafina corrected, her mind already calculating the implications. This could be the richest gold strike in history. But here's where the story takes a dark turn, because the twins weren't the only ones who had noticed something unusual about that particular stretch of mountain. As they stood marveling at their discovery, a shadow fell across the golden vein. They turned to find 3 men watching them from the ridge above. Men in the blue uniforms of the U.S. Geological Survey. Men whose job it was to map and catalog the mineral wealth of the territories for the federal government. Well, said the leader, a thin man with cold eyes and a surveyor's transit slung over his shoulder. Looks like we've got ourselves some claim jumpers, boys. This is public land, Evangeline said, her diplomatic training kicking in. We have every right to be here. The surveyor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Not anymore, miss. As of last week, this entire area has been designated a federal mineral reserve, which means any gold found here belongs to the United States government. Are you starting to see the setup here? The government had been secretly surveying the area, probably tipped off by their own geological reports. They were planning to claim the gold for themselves, and the Ashford family had just stumbled into the middle of their scheme. Serafina's hand moved instinctively to the small pistol she always carried, a habit their father had insisted upon after a bank robbery attempt the previous year. Funny how that designation happened to come through just now, she said, almost like someone knew what was here. Careful, miss, the surveyor warned. Threatening federal agents is a serious crime. So is claim jumping. Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The eldest Ashford sister had approached silently, her business instincts telling her that something was very wrong. And so is attempting to defraud private citizens of their legal mining rights. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Victoria Ashford knew more about mining law than most lawyers, and she was about to turn the tables on the federal agents in a way that would change everything. According to the Mining Act of 1872, Victoria continued, her voice calm and professional, any mineral discovery on public land can be claimed by the discoverer, provided they file the proper paperwork within 60 days. Federal designation of mineral reserves requires congressional approval and public notice, neither of which has occurred for this area. The surveyor's confident smile faltered. That's not how it works. Actually, it is exactly how it works, Victoria replied. I should know. My bank has financed dozens of mining operations, and I've studied every relevant law on the books. You gentlemen are the ones who are breaking the law here. And that's when the Ashford sisters made the decision that would turn them from respectable bankers into the most wanted outlaws in America. Evangeline, Serafina, Victoria said quietly, never taking her eyes off the federal agents. Go back to the family, tell them we're leaving immediately, and tell them to pack everything. We won't be coming back to Carson City. Victoria, what are you? Evangeline started. We're claiming this strike, Victoria said. All of it, and we're going to fight for it. Now, if you think the story is intense so far, just wait. Because what happened next turned a simple mining dispute into a full-scale war between a family of determined women and the entire United States government. The ride back to Carson City was tense and silent. Cornelius could sense that something had changed, that his daughters were planning something that would alter their lives forever. But it wasn't until they reached the bank and Victoria called a family meeting that he learned the full scope of what they had discovered. Father, Victoria said, spreading a hand-drawn map across his desk, we need to talk about the future of this family. When she finished explaining their discovery and the government's attempt to steal it, Cornelius sat in stunned silence for a full minute. Then he did something his daughters had never seen before. He laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the bitter laugh of a man who had finally seen the true face of the system he'd spent his life serving. They think they can just take it, he said. They think because we're just one family, we'll roll over and let them steal what's rightfully ours. What do we do, Father? Alexandra asked. Cornelius looked at his 6 daughters, brilliant, beautiful, and more capable than most men he knew, and made a decision that would echo through history. We fight. He said simply, "We claim that gold, we defend our claim, and we show the federal government that the Ashford family doesn't back down from anyone." But fighting the U.S. government requires more than determination. It requires an army. And that's where the Ashford sisters' story takes another incredible turn. The first step was legal. Victoria and Beatrice rode to the territorial capital and filed mining claims for the entire area, paying the fees and following every letter of the law. They also hired the best lawyers money could buy, men who specialized in mining disputes and weren't afraid to take on federal prosecutors. The second step was financial. Alexandra liquidated assets, called in loans, and converted the family's entire fortune into gold and silver, portable wealth that couldn't be frozen by government order. Within a week, they had over $2 million in hard currency, more than enough to fund a small war. But the third step was the most audacious of all, and it's what transformed the Ashford sisters from wealthy bankers into legendary outlaws. Cordelia used her language skills and diplomatic connections to reach out to mercenaries, gunfighters, and soldiers of fortune from across the American West and beyond. She contacted Confederate veterans who still harbored grudges against the federal government, Mexican revolutionaries looking for a cause, and European adventurers seeking their fortunes in the New World. The message was simple. The Ashford family was offering top dollar for experienced fighters willing to defend a legitimate mining claim against federal aggression. No questions asked, no loyalty required beyond the length of their contract, and payment in gold upon completion of service. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. They got over 300 responses in the first month alone. The mercenaries began arriving in small groups, careful not to attract attention. There was Blackjack Morrison, a former Confederate cavalry officer who'd been fighting various wars for 20 years. Maria Vasquez, a Mexican revolutionary whose skill with dynamite was matched only by her hatred of authority. Hans Muller, a Prussian military engineer who'd helped build fortifications across 3 continents. But the most dangerous recruit was a man known only as the Colonel, a mysterious figure who claimed to have served in the Franco-Prussian War, the Zulu Wars, and half a dozen other conflicts. He arrived with his own small army of professional soldiers, men who followed orders without question and killed without conscience. Now here's where things get really crazy, because the Ashford sisters weren't just hiring an army, they were building a nation. Using their newfound wealth, the sisters purchased supplies, weapons, and equipment on a massive scale. They bought repeating rifles, artillery pieces, and enough ammunition to fight a sustained campaign. They also invested in infrastructure, building roads, establishing supply lines, and creating a communications network that would make their mountain stronghold nearly impregnable. Evangeline proved to be a natural diplomat, negotiating treaties with local Native American tribes who had their own grievances against the federal government. The Paiute and Shoshone, tired of broken promises and stolen land, agreed to provide intelligence and safe passage in exchange for gold and weapons. Serafina took charge of military operations, working with the colonel to design defensive positions and train their growing army. Her natural leadership abilities and fearless attitude earned the respect of even the most hardened mercenaries. But the most brilliant move came from Beatrice, the strategist of the family, who realized that they needed more than military might to win their war. "We need legitimacy," Beatrice explained during one of their planning sessions. "We need the world to see us as freedom fighters, not criminals." Her solution was audacious. They would declare independence. Not from the United States entirely, but from federal authority over their territory. They would establish the Free Republic of Goldfield, with its own constitution, its own laws, and its own government. And that's exactly what they did. On July 4th, 1889, a date chosen for maximum symbolic impact, Victoria Ashford stood before a crowd of mercenaries, miners, and sympathizers, and read the Declaration of Independence of the Free Republic of Goldfield. The document, written primarily by Beatrice with input from their lawyers, laid out their grievances against the federal government and asserted their right to self-determination. "We hold these truths to be self-evident," Victoria declared, her voice carrying across the mountain valley, "that all people are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, including the right to keep the fruits of their own labor and the treasures they discover through their own efforts. The federal government's response was swift and brutal. President Benjamin Harrison, already dealing with labor unrest and economic uncertainty, saw the Goldfield Republic as a direct threat to federal authority. He ordered the U.S. Army to retake the territory by any means necessary, authorizing the use of artillery and cavalry against what he termed armed insurrectionists and enemies of the state. The first battle of the Goldfield War took place on August 15, 1889, when a regiment of federal cavalry attempted to storm the mountain passes leading to the sisters' stronghold. They were met by carefully positioned defenders who had turned the narrow defiles into killing fields. What happened next shocked military observers around the world. The federal cavalry, expecting to face a ragtag group of miners and outlaws, instead encountered a professional army equipped with the latest weapons and led by experienced officers. The Ashford sisters had used their wealth to purchase not just guns and ammunition, but military expertise and tactical knowledge. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of the federal force. Of the 400 soldiers who entered the mountain passes, fewer than 50 escaped to tell the tale. The rest were killed, captured, or simply disappeared into the wilderness. But here's the part that really terrified the government. The Ashford sisters weren't content to simply defend their territory. They were going on the offensive. Using their network of sympathizers and their vast financial resources, the sisters began funding similar resistance movements across the West. They provided weapons and gold to disgruntled miners, displaced Native Americans, and anyone else with a grievance against federal authority. Within months, there were uprisings in Colorado, Montana, and California. Federal troops found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against enemies who seemed to have unlimited resources and professional military leadership. And at the center of it all were 6 women who had transformed from respectable bankers into the most dangerous revolutionaries in American history. The war might have continued indefinitely, but it ended in a way that no one expected. On December 7, 1889, exactly 4 months after the first battle, a lone rider approached the Goldfield Republic under a flag of truce. It was President Harrison himself, accompanied only by a small escort and a team of negotiators. What happened in that meeting between the President of the United States and 6 revolutionary sisters remains classified to this day, but the results speak for themselves. The Goldfield Accords, signed on December 15, 1889, granted the Ashford sisters legal ownership of their mining claims in exchange for disbanding their army and ceasing support for other resistance movements. The federal government also agreed to pay substantial reparations for the military action and to grant amnesty to all participants in the conflict. But here's the secret that the government never wanted revealed. The Ashford sisters had discovered something far more valuable than gold in those mountains. Hidden in the deepest shafts of their mine was a deposit of uranium ore, a mineral that wouldn't become strategically important for another 50 years, but which the sisters' European advisors had recognized as potentially revolutionary. The federal government, faced with the possibility of a private army armed with future weapons of unimaginable power, chose negotiation over continued warfare. And that's how 6 women who started with a family picnic ended up dictating terms to the President of the United States. The official records list the Goldfield War as a minor territorial dispute resolved through diplomatic means. The truth: that a family of bankers had successfully fought the U.S. government to a standstill and forced a sitting president to negotiate was buried in classified files and forgotten by history. But the Ashford sisters never forgot. They used their wealth to establish banks, schools, and hospitals across the West. They funded women's suffrage movements, Native American rights organizations, and labor unions. They became philanthropists and power brokers, shaping the development of the American frontier from behind the scenes. And here's the question that'll haunt you. In a world where the government can seize private property at will, where individual rights mean nothing against federal power, How different are we from the people of 1889? How far would you go to protect what's rightfully yours? And if you had the wealth and determination of the Ashford sisters, would you have the courage to fight back? Victoria Ashford lived to be 93, dying peacefully in her San Francisco mansion in 1956. Her last words, according to her nurse, were, "Tell them we never surrendered. Tell them we won." The other sisters lived equally long and prosperous lives, their descendants becoming some of the most influential families in the American West. But they never spoke publicly about the Goldfield War, taking their secrets to their graves. The mine itself was sealed by government order in 1945, officially due to geological instability. Unofficially, it was because someone in Washington finally understood what the Ashford sisters had really discovered in those mountains, and they were terrified of what might happen if that knowledge became public. Today, if you drive through the Nevada mountains and know where to look, you can still find traces of the Goldfield Republic. Crumbling fortifications, rusted weapons, and the occasional gold nugget washed down from the sealed mine. Local legends speak of 6 beautiful women who once ruled their own kingdom, who fought the United States government and won. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether one family can really make a difference against impossible odds, whether courage and determination can triumph over overwhelming power, remember the Ashford sisters. Remember how they turned a Sunday picnic into a revolution, how they used their wealth to buy an army, and how they forced the most powerful nation on earth to negotiate on their terms. Because sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in the ground, they're found in the human spirit. And that's a gold mine that can never be exhausted.